Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Today, we tackle a very vexing garden problem plaguing listeners throughout the country: how to get rid of ants that are in your raised beds and plant containers. We, of course, would be myself and America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, and she has her own home formula for ridding your household, as well as your containers and raised beds that are infested with ants. Plus, we have a conversation with master food preserver and State Fair food judge Wendy Rose about two topics. Number one, how to save an early partial harvest for use later in your various recipes for cooking or canning because you're waiting for more to ripen this spring and summer before you decide to light up the stove. And we ask this very experienced county and state fair food preservation competition judge for tips on how you can have a winning entry for your jams, jellies, and other preserves in county and state fair competition. No bribery is involved. It's all in today's episode 268, dealing with ants in raised beds and how to win at the fair. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. We like to answer your garden emails here on the Garden Basics podcast. Debbie Flower is in the studio with us today, and we're tackling some of your questions that you sent in on SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/Garden Basics, yell at your computer, and we will get your question. No phone charges will be incurred if you do that. Debbie, let's tackle Brenda's question about raised beds and ants.
Okay.
Hi, Farmer Fred and Debbie Flower. This is Brenda. I live in Elk Grove, California. I have two large raised beds. They're about 2 feet off the ground, 4 by 8 each. They are infested with ants. What have I done wrong, and how can I get rid of these things? Thanks a lot. Love your show. Bye.
Brenda, you haven't done anything wrong. Ants are part of our yards.
Yep.
They were here first.
Yep. You've done absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah. Ants just like raised beds.
Yes.
It's all that loose soil, I think.
It's kind of dry there, yes.
Yeah. And there's food to eat, too.
Yes. And there might be plants with aphids on them that the ants can tend and collect the honeydew from those aphids. But it is a problem when you get too many in your raised bed.
Yeah, and the fact that they are nature's little cowboys herding those aphids around to various parts of your plants, where those aphids then suck on your plant parts and excrete that euphemism honeydew, which the ants take back and feed to the queen. But I think ants can be fairly easily controlled with fairly moderate chemicals. I consider boric acid a fairly moderate chemical.
Right. It's something that if your pet gets into it at the rates it's being used, anything is toxic at some point. Toxicity is all about rates. How strong is that chemical at that moment? But in the rates that it's used in ant baits, commercial or whether you make your own, it is so minimal that your pets can eat it. It can run into your fish pond and it won't hurt them. Birds can come by and eat it, whatever, and it will not harm them. So you can buy commercial ant baits. I have had this problem not in my raised bed, and my raised bed is also 4 by 8 and about 2 feet high. They haven't been there, although my raised beds are in one of the wetter parts of my yard, so they probably couldn't get there. They couldn't swim. But I've had that problem in containers on my patio, and I go out to tend. It was my catmint that it happened to last. Tend that plant, and it's just ants coming out all over the place, or watering it and ants coming out all over the place, climbing up on the plant. And I used, in that case, commercial ant bait. I put several in the top of it was probably a 12 to 15 inch diameter pot, and opened them up, left them there, went away, and came back a few days later, and all the ants were gone.
Yeah, we should point out we're talking about ant bait, not ant traps, because the goal here is for them to take back that boric acid and feed everybody else back at the colony.
Mm-hmm. They have to feed the queen. Ants are like bees in that regard. They have a queen, and she does all the baby making, and she keeps, the ants will stick around as long as there's a queen there to serve. And if the queen dies, the ants just take off, and I don't know if they die or what they do, but the colony disperses. So you've got to feed that boric acid ant bait to the queen to kill the colony.
There are many formulations of boric acid. In some formulations, it's referred to on the label as orthoboric acid. Mm-hmm. In others, there may be some other form of borate in there, but they all basically work the same way. It's a bait that when used judiciously, not too much and not too little, the ants will find attractive and take back to their nest. Ants in a raised bed is much like ants in a pile of mulch. There have been times in my career of moving and shoveling mulch from one part of the yard to the other is when I stick that shovel into a pile that's been sitting there for a few months, all of a sudden the ants are very active. All of a sudden, hey, get out of our house. And so I'll go back in the house and I'll get a can of boric acid powder. Commercially, one name is roach proof.
Yeah, it's sold as roach killing.
But it's boric acid, right. And it's like a powder. And I would go back to the mulch pile and see where the ants were coming from, dig a little bit. You can find out pretty quickly, and just throw, half a cup or a cup worth of boric acid into there, cover it back up, go away, and then come back 2 weeks later, start shoveling, and there's no ants.
That's pretty cool, because in that's full concentration, and somehow you're getting to the queen.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
But you're right. If you put it on too thickly, and you can find boric acid products in spray bottles, not spray bottles, but squeeze bottles as well. And if you apply it too thickly, they figure out, oh, we need to walk around this.
Right. Or if your bait contains too high a concentration of it, they pick it up and start their trek back to the queen and die before they get to her. And so she doesn't get a dose of it and she doesn't die.
Yeah, I think in the case of the mulch pile, that's where the colony was. So they didn't have far to travel to take it back to the queen. But if you have an ant infestation in your house, for example, you do want that weaker concentration.
Right.
What's nice, too, there are some liquid boric acid products, and you can find liquid boric acid products along with a, shall we say, a dispenser that looks sort of like a pawn in a game of chess that you can just set out in your yard filled with the diluted liquid. And just leave it there for a couple of weeks, wherever they may be, wherever you see an ant trail. And they'll swarm that and start sucking up that and walk away and maybe not come back.
Right. Beware that it is a bait, and so it's attractive to the ants. An ant finds it, tells his buddy, who tells their buddy, who tells their buddy. And so it's possible that the amount of ants, quantity of ants that you see around the trap will be more than you were seeing before. But that's because they've told everybody else in the colony to come get this great food you've just put out for them. Of course, they don't know there's boric acid in it. Boric acid, it dries things out. That's why it's used for other pest control. Ultimately, it kills them.
Yeah, there are some other problems with having ants in a raised bed, not the least of which is they're making tunnels underground. And when you go to water your plants, the water may be bypassing the roots of your plants and going straight down to wherever.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
So it behooves you that when you spot an ant problem in your garden bed, especially a raised bed, is to take action quickly.
Right.
And that, again, would be with a boric acid type product.
Yep.
And you can make your own boric acid bait. And Debbie has been touting this recipe for years.
Yes, I have. And I've used it in my kitchen. It's one part.
Well, could you use it outdoors?
You could use it outdoors. You make a little trap, and I'll explain that. So you use 1 part boric acid and 9 parts of sugar to make the bait. So what's a part? It's any device you use for measuring. I use things like teaspoons. So it would be 1 teaspoon boric acid and 19 teaspoons of sugar. And then you can add water to make it whatever consistency you want. I would choose you mix them together really well. And then I would choose as much as I want for my first application, and I would wet that because it dries out fairly quickly. you can just leave it then on the kitchen counter or wherever you're having an indoor problem, or you can put it on a piece of wax paper or a piece of aluminum foil. The ants find it and they feed it the gel. I only put out about half or a quarter teaspoon a day. And they come all around the edges and feed like pigs at the trough. And then the next day that has dried out and I put out another, wet some more and put some more out. That's why I suggest you not wet it all at once. It will dry out by the next day. For outdoors, you need to make a little trap. Use some sort of a plastic container. I happen to find in the automotive department of, 99-cent dollar kind of store, a package of 10 little containers that were maybe 2.5 inches across and an inch and or so deep.
With a lid?
With lid.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to have a lid. Has to have a tight-fitting lid. And so you take the lid off and poke some holes in it that an ant can get through. So they're very small holes. Maybe use a tip of a meat fork or something like that to make the holes. And in the container, put cotton balls just up to the top, but not packed tight. There can be space between them. Those are just little islands for the ants to feed on. So when they go in the little holes, they have some place to stand. And then pour the wet bait over the top of the cotton balls, put the lid on, and then make a depression in the soil where you want the bait station to go. Lower the station into the hole so that the top that you've put the holes in is flush with the soil. Pack it in there so it fits nicely, and the ants can walk from the soil right across the top. They'll find the bait, and they'll go in and out of those holes and take it. And so you can check it each day. I would check it daily and add more of the wet bait to it.
Do the ants leave?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not so much a trap as it is a bait.
It's a bait station, right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
And again, it has to be a weak concentration of boric acid for this to work. And I think your recipe was 1 part boric acid, 9 parts sugar?
Yes, and someone you and I both know, Pete Strasser, who was an entomologist for a local nursery chain here and now has moved out of the state, he uses 1 to 20.
Because he's cheap.
Well, that's a possibility. But that, at the rate that I have had my container of boric acid for probably decades. Yes. At the rate you use it, that's not a concern for me. But yes, so the point being that you don't want to go stronger than 1 to 9. You want to go weaker.
Then 1 in 20. Is much weaker.
It is much weaker. You have more sugar, 20 parts sugar and 1 part boric acid.
So Pete is a miser.
Yeah.
Not a...
Maybe he's an entomologist. He might just like watching those ants come and go. Okay. You never know. Yes. I don't know. Maybe we'll hear from him.
Yeah, really. When he's not staring at the sky at night.
Right. Now he works on dark sky communities. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So this bait is usable indoors, outdoors.
Right. And again, it's something that if your dog were to eat the whole thing, it's such a small amount of boric acid, it would not harm them. If they ate the paper or the cotton, that might be worse. But if they just eat the bait, that is not going to be harmful to your animal.
But first, they would have to take the lid off.
Yes.
Yeah. And how often do you check those outdoor traps? Every day?
I check them daily.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's another tip for controlling ants outdoors. Any other solutions you can think of?
For the raised bed?
Yeah.
No, only when the first time I heard it, I thought, okay, she said 2 feet tall. I thought maybe it was on legs. And if it was on legs, then you can put some tanglefoot. If you see ants going up and down, let's say a tree trunk, tanglefoot is made as a trap. It's sticky stuff. And the ants walk up and down the trunk and they walk through it and they can't get to the other side because they're stuck. A couple of caveats about that. One is it will leave a permanent stain, shall we say. It looks like a wet spot on that tree trunk. Putting something on the trunk first, like
cellophane or saran wrap, something like that. Right.
Or even, I was thinking maybe even masking tape. If the bark is smooth, that will work. And then put the tanglefoot on the cellophane or the tape. If it's a rough bark, they'll just go right underneath it. And so then a trap at the ground where they are reaching the ground from that tree trunk would be useful.
Yeah, and that's like that pond-shaped device I was telling you about that holds the liquid boric acid can come in and be very effective. I think the other downside to coating the outside of a tree trunk is you may have the Audubon Society picketing outside your house.
Yeah, there is a chance that if it's at the right height, a bird could fly into it and get stuck.
Yeah. So and I understand that, and I don't want to harm no bird.
No, me neither.
Yeah. I guess you could buy a herd of anteaters and try that, but that might be slow. And I don't know what else anteaters eat.
Yeah, then what do you do with them?
Yes, really. Well, there must be a barbecue book somewhere.
I'll bet. Wherever they're native, I'm sure they're food for somebody.
All right. Ants in a raised bed. You can solve this problem. Just jump on it when you see them.
Yes. And you didn't do anything wrong.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Fred.
I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We're at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center on a beautiful May day, and we're already thinking about food. The master food preservers are here, as well as the master gardeners. And one of these days soon, if not already, you might be looking at your garden thinking, oh man, what am I going to do with all these beets or tomatoes or zucchini when they come in? Or maybe you don't have enough right now. Can you keep those tomatoes or zucchini or whatever till you get enough to make whatever recipe you want? And maybe you're thinking about entering a county fair or a state fair in the near future. What do judges at fairs look for when you bring in your preserves or your foods or whatever? Let's find out. We're talking with Wendy Rose, master food preserver. She's on Twitter at CanningBee. Wendy, I can see that problem of having tomatoes starting to come in June or July, but not quite enough to maybe make a full recipe. So you have to wait a while. As a food preserver, is there a trick?
So last year we had kind of a rough tomato season and we didn't really get a whole lot. And I felt like I was getting dribs and drabs of tomatoes, a couple here and there. So basically what I did was I put them into gallon Ziploc bags in the freezer, as I got them, as they came ripe, and picked them, and I put them in the freezer, and then when I got a full bag or a couple full bags, then I went and made salsa with that or tomato sauce. And I did the same thing with tomatillos. You can do that with a lot of things. You can either dehydrate them initially or freeze them initially and then make your recipes after you've got enough to do for a full recipe.
Do you take the air out of the Ziploc bags, or do you pre-freeze those tomatoes for like an hour till they're somewhat firm and then put them into a vacuum sealer bag?
I usually pre-freeze them on cookie sheets in the freezer overnight. I let them go overnight so that they're frozen, and then I put them in the bags. And I just use, the Ziploc type bags, and I just try to get the most air out that I can. Usually those are not in the freezer for more than, a few months, so they're fine that way.
With the frozen tomatoes, too, if you get a hankering for tomato soup, well, there you go.
Yes, exactly. You don't have to even preserve it after that. You can just use them in recipes.
You mentioned dehydrator as well. Tell us a little bit about dehydrators. Everybody's got their favorites, but the idea of preserving something temporarily with a dehydrator is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so in Sacramento, we kind of have we have a manufacturer here locally called Excalibur, and that's the one that I have, and it's my favorite. It's really well built, and it's set up, and it's easy to use. And so, and I also, I will do sun drying sometimes too, because Sacramento has such a great climate for drying.
Yeah, sun drying is great too. If you've got the spring or summer heat to put them out on, would you put them out on screens?
I put them out on screens, and to make sure that the air can circulate, I also cover with cheesecloth to make sure I don't get, big bugs in there. And then once the drying is done, I will put them in the freezer. Then in case there are any little buggies in there, that'll take care of them.
Double duty of dehydration and freezing. But if you want to bring them back to life, what's the process?
So it depends on what it is. With tomatoes, typically I'll just let them thaw, and then I'll use them from there. But like with zucchini and things like that, you want to rehydrate, so you'll put them in water, let them soak some water back up.
How do you freeze zucchini? Do you have to slice it up first? I mean, they're kind of big, or can be kind of big.
Yeah, I usually cut them into relatively small pieces. Zucchini in the freezer has a tendency to get a little bit mushy, so that's the kind of thing I'll put into like soups and stews, where I don't need it to be, the nice firm quality.
Another topic that people may be wondering about right now as they proceed with their spring and early summer gardening is, hey, there's a fair coming up, a county fair or a state fair, and boy, everybody sure loves my apple pie or apple jelly or cherry preserves or whatever. You are I don't know if you get paid for it, but you're a professional judge at fairs. What do judges look for in the various categories when it comes to the food competition?
So each fair typically has its own rules. So the first thing you want to do if you're going to compete is you want to check the rules and read through very carefully to see what's required. And then you want your entry to meet those requirements as closely as possible.
All right. Now, in your own experience as a judge, when you're judging something, let's say it is something in a jar, a preserve, a jelly, a jam, or what are you looking for?
The technicals are really important. Things like headspace, a clean jar, a clean lid, a clean ring. Those things are really, really important. Those are the first things that judges look at. And so you need to meet those criteria in order to even get the judge to taste what's inside the jar.
Read and follow all label directions, because I imagine for all these fair competitions, those criteria, those rules are posted, and people should follow them.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how you do well in fairs, is that you're meeting those criteria very, very closely.
All right. So it's just like entering a sweepstakes where you have to fill out everything precisely according to the directions.
Exactly.
Do you get bonus points for printing out a label and sticking that on the jar? But where do you stick a label on a jar if you're doing that?
So the rules will tell you if you're going to have a label, where to put the label, what kind of label, the information that you put on the label. The rules should tell you exactly what that is.
For your own edification and use at home, where are your labels and what information is on those labels? Realizing you're a master food preserver, so there may be more information there than most people want to squeeze into a label, but give us an idea.
So I usually don't label now. I did when I started out, but I usually take a Sharpie and write on the lid, the metal lid. I'll write what the food is, absolutely put the date on there, and then any other information, like if I've made it somewhat spicy, I'll put that on there so that if I give it as a gift, I make sure that I don't give a spicy thing to somebody who doesn't like spicy.
No sugar versus sugar.
Exactly.
What are some other requirements? Now, this takes us on a very scenic bypass, too, that if you're in the habit of preserving your harvest and putting it in jars, it's not uncommon to give it away as gifts. How do you get people to use it? One thing I found, because I used to grow acres of popcorn, and I would give away canned popcorn as gifts. And I'd go back to their house a few years later, and that popcorn is still sitting on the shelf there. It hasn't been popped yet. And then I discovered that people have forgotten how to pop popcorn, so there's that. How do you get people to use it?
So you can include like a little tag that has a recipe on it. I mean, for me, a lot of the things I make, I have favorite ways of using them, and so I could put that on the tag. With my sweet pickle relish, I put that in tuna. That's my favorite thing to use that for. And so just little recommendations like that of ways that you've used it before.
And that your family and friends have also found very appealing.
Yeah, right.
Tell us more about entering fairs, either county fairs or state fairs. Should you concentrate on one specialty, or should you enter as many categories as there are?
I think it's better to get good at a few things and enter those. One of the things that we see commonly is where there's a family recipe. This happens a lot with like spaghetti sauce or marinara. There's a family recipe that somebody's been making for years, and then, they want to can it. And then it gets into the fair, competition and being judged. And then the judges will look at the ingredients and say, these ingredients are not acidic enough together to be safely canned. So the key is to make sure you're using a recipe that is the chemistry is right, and the Master Food Preservers have recipes. Ball has recipes. National Center for Home Food Preservation has recipes. They've all been tested, so that that when you make that the chemistry is going to be right. It's going to be, if it's a low acid, product, it's going to be low acid. But just creating a recipe and then canning it is a very tricky thing to do that most people don't have the expertise to do.
And probably if you're doing tomatoes, and a lot of the recipes for canning tomatoes say, put in a tablespoon of lemon juice for the acidity. I discovered fairly recently that a Meyer lemon is not lemon juice.
No. So the recipes that have been tested use bottled lemon juice that has a very specific acidity. So the recipes will all call for bottled lemon juice.
That's a good point to make there. So for newbies who have never entered a fair competition, it could be a local fair. By the way, my Pluot Jam won first prize in 1995, I think, during Herald Day. Nice. But if you're a newbie and entering a competition, what are some of the other advantages of entering?
So I can talk about my own experience. When I started entering in fairs, I had a lot to learn. But, doing it over and over and over, I learned a lot. And I learned how to do safe canning. I learned to make sure that my headspace was correct and get the processing time right and all those things. And now they're really kind of second nature to me. But it was a really, really good learning experience. Competing was fun because I'm kind of a competitive person. But it was just neat to enter things and then have them be judged and then receive the comments and then have it displayed with the ribbon. And I really, really enjoyed competing in county fairs and at the California State Fair.
Is there a camaraderie among the entrants, or is it a grudge match and you don't really talk with them?
Well, at the state fair, it's open judging and it's in a theater. And so you can sit and watch the judges judge, and you try to see whether they've got your item up there. But in the audience are these really fun people who really enjoy preserving food. And it's really a big sense of camaraderie. And when somebody wins, there's applause, and it's just a lot of fun.
I imagine there's some recipe trading going on as well.
No, all the recipes are top secret.
Oh. Well, maybe if you get them drunk first. Now, Wendy, you've been a University of California Master Food Preserver for 10 years now. Master Food Preserver groups are throughout the country, usually associated with a local university. What do Master Food Preservers do?
In California, Master Food Preservers go through a training program, and then they are let loose on the public and go out and teach safe food preservation and really function as a resource for the community for questions or guidance and ideas. And across the country, different states have their own Master Food Preserver programs. It's all part of the extension system, and it just depends on the state. But California has over 20 different chapters of Master Food Preservers.
And as you mentioned, their real purpose is volunteerism with education, of teaching the public the correct way to do that. You see Master Food Preservers and Master Gardeners usually sitting at a table at various fairs or home shows or gatherings like this at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. What are some of the more common questions you get as a Master Food Preserver?
I think that the questions that we get most commonly are specific to our area, because folks out here they grow a lot of tomatoes. And so we get a lot of questions about preserving tomatoes and stone fruit, just trees that people have, citrus fruit. The questions are typically specific to what we're able to grow here. We don't have a lot of tropical fruits typically, and so but a whole lot of questions about tomatoes, tomatillos, things like that.
We're talking with Wendy Rose, University of California Master Food Preserver. Got some good information if you want to enter a fair or you want to preserve tomatoes, either temporarily or long-term. Good info. You can find a Master Food Preserver wherever you may live. Just type in the words in a search engine, Master Food Preserver, and the name of your state, and I bet you'll get more information about the Master Food Preservers and maybe even a list about where they're appearing, where you can ask them questions. And Wendy, thank you for answering our questions.
Thank you, Fred.
Are you thinking of growing fruit trees? Maybe you already are, but you want to know more about them. Well, you probably have a million questions, like which fruit trees will grow where I live? What are the tastiest fruits? When's harvest time? How do I care for these trees? The good news is the answers are all nearby. Just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. And in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart so you can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard for a long growing season. Here in USDA Zone 9, that could be May through December. And you're just a click away with the informative YouTube video series at davewilson.com. As part of that video series, they'll walk you through the simple process of using the Dave Wilson website to find their trees either at a nearby local nursery or at a mail order source. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest grower of fruit trees for the backyard garden. They've got planting tips, taste test results, and information about their revolutionary backyard orchard culture techniques. That'll explain how you can have a cornucopia of different fruit trees in a small backyard. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. All gardening is local. Know your soil. Mulch, mulch, mulch. Those are just 3 of the now infamous list of 11 tips for garden success, a Farmer Fred staple for decades. In the latest Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast, we have the first audio presentation of this list of pithy garden advice, as we presented it as a PowerPoint talk at a recent meeting of the Sun City Lincoln Hills Garden Club. And the newsletter will highlight some of those slides. Yeah, I know they're not slides, they're pictures. Give me a break, I'm old. Some of those slides are in the newsletter to give you a better idea of what I was talking about, along with all the 11 garden tips for success. This newsletter and special podcast is currently available, and it's free. If you're already a Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter subscriber, it's probably in your email waiting for you right now. Or you can start a subscription. It's free. Find the link to the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast in today's show notes or at Substack. And you can sign up at the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. You're familiar with compost, right? But what do you know about compost tea? Your plants just might appreciate the microbial boost provided by compost tea. Please note that I did not say nutritional boost. There's a lot of opinion and unverified personal experience associated with the compost tea knowledge base, but not that much about it has had a lot of peer-reviewed research, including its alleged nutritional value. There is one master gardener, though, who has pursued that topic, delving deep into the academic rabbit holes. He's Ralph Marini, a Piedmont, Virginia master gardener and researcher. We talked a while back with Ralph about what he found out about compost tea and research papers, including how to make it, how to use it, and what to expect from compost tea. If you fertilize your plants, this is a flashback episode worth listening to. It's called Compost Tea Explained, originally aired in episode 197. It's from May of 2022. Look up this informative episode on the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast list from the podcast player of your choice, or click on the link in today's show notes, or go to our homepage, gardenbasics.net. The The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net, or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.